Okay? Now, how do we get there? How do we get from here to there? It is, in my opinion, it's going to be quite difficult to get there solely on the basis of somebody like Uber. That you need a buy-in of a bunch of parties that, and I've sort of tried to list them, Georgia DOT and MARTA would be the obvious ones in Atlanta. Community improvement districts, starting with one. Perimeter is probably the best one in Atlanta. It has the most congestion probably, and it has MARTA, and it has a lot of companies and so on that could sign in, but they've got a very good organization at the perimeter CID. But other ones are saying, Buckhead, Midtown, I think there's about 20, believe it or not, there's about 20 community improvement districts in Atlanta. The feature of a community improvement district, which is sort of a Georgia phenomena in the name of it, I think, is that they have voted to tax the businesses in a certain area to support improvements in that area. And so there's a pretty high budget in the perimeter community improvement district to do transportation. In fact, they have a good transportation organization. I've visited with them. Okay? Now, here's the one that I'm talking about today. I think Georgia Tech could take a great leadership position in solving or resolving, maybe that's a better term, the urban transportation problem and put Georgia ahead of everybody else. Now, that's why I'm here arguing for it. Put Georgia ahead of everybody else, and the best party to lead that happens to be a group from Georgia Tech, in my opinion. Now, you've got, obviously, Greta and the Atlanta Regional Commission. And then there's a provider community. Now, I put RideCell in there. RideCell does have a number of features that use the patent, and they are a company that I started. They're now in California. Okay? But I'm trying to work with them and Georgia Tech. Turns out Georgia Tech patents are controlled, if you happen to have given it to them, and I did. GTRC, Georgia Tech Research Corporation, controls the use of intellectual property. Not GTRI, not the academic side. GTRC controls the use of academic property. Academic, is that right? Intellectual property is the better way of saying it. And I just listed some obvious, reasons, but I think AT&T and WorldPay, at least, and even Verizon, are quite active interacting with Georgia Tech in one way or another. Okay, AT&T has an office in Fifth Street. I'm pretty sure that WorldPay has put in $1 million into Georgia Tech. But by the way, you don't know what WorldPay does. WorldPay is in the background on a transaction with a cell phone or a retail merchant to run your MasterCard bill to MasterCard. So when you're dealing with a charge at a merchant, they're not communicating directly normally with the issuer of the credit card. They're dealing with somebody like WorldPay, who then transfers the charge to the appropriate credit card company or PayPal or something like that. Of course, I've already said you want a utilities type system. Now, when I say utility-like, the issue is more the fact that it is more efficient. I don't know whether you guys know why you have utilities at all. That's an economics question. And it has to do with I lost that term. There's an economic term.
Monopoly?
Huh?
Monopoly?
What's that?
Monopoly?
Monopoly. It is an economic benefit of a monopoly. We don't want to have two natural gas companies distributing gas in our neighborhood, do we? It costs too much. The same is true for electricity. The same might be true for martyr. You want to have a single provider. So a utility is a special case of where you have a monopoly legally established. I'm going to make a point here. The road system, of course, is a monopoly. Georgia DOT and others control the road system. You don't build two sets of roads. English, by the way, is a monopoly.
But toll roads don't necessarily have to be owned by the state, right?
They don't have to be owned, but they have to be controlled to some extent.
True.
They have to be controlled. They're part of a monopoly. I was going to say English is a monopoly here. Why is it better that we all speak English? Here, not all over the world. It's more efficient, isn't it? English may not be a particularly good language, but it's efficient if we all speak English.
But aren't you referring more to standardization? I mean, economically,
well,
monopolies are not at all necessarily the best, because monopolies can charge whatever they want.
Well, and that's why they're utilities, right? By definition, a utility has a regulated charge. Okay? That's what a real utility has, is a regulated charge for that very reason. And utility sort of started with the railroads in the middle of the 1800s. Somebody realized, or people started to realize, we can't build two railroad tracks from this small town to that small town. Not efficient. Suppose we only have one railroad track. Well, they're going to be able to charge whatever they want, because there was no competition then for a railroad. Okay, there is now. And so they had to have, they eventually turned out, we regulated the railroad charge. Okay? But anyway, any questions are fine. That's what I mean for the utility line. Venture funding, that's probably quite feasible, particularly based on the fact that there's a patent that describes the entire system. That makes it helpful, because the people who are participating, you say, you're not violating the patent. Now, it's very difficult, by the way, to go after Uber at this point. So what you'd like to do is make Uber a partner. And there, in the master app, Uber is really part of the system, right? And you want to do the same thing that Uber did. You don't want to start this all over the country. You want to start it at a very restricted geographic area that could use it. So I picked the Community Improvement District, in particular perimeter, could be a very good one. Or right around here, Midtown. I think that might be the term for us, I'm not sure. Yeah, and then I say once demonstrated, then of course you could expand it all over Atlanta, you could expand it all over the U.S., you could expand it all over the world, and that's what Uber has done. That's the way they got started. Very small area, they started, they moved it up. Now you'll notice the word "end" here. I put that in to make sure I didn't go on to more slides at this point, and I want to open it up for questions. However, let me go down to the one that's already been shown. Let me see if I can do it. I think that was not one of them. No, I think I've gotten beyond. These are, I'm not going to discuss these. These are other, I'll give you just one thing to think about. Now, let me see. High-speed tollways. We have a person at Georgia Tech who sort of suggested it to me. Is it really efficient to build high-speed rails from Atlanta to Chicago? No. Much more efficient to build a 150-mile-an-hour tollway that has both passengers and freight. Right? Now, having finished this thing, what I want you to do, or I'd like you to do, is think of yourself, this is probably not fair, as being at MIT. I got my PhD there, or Doctor of Science, actually. In places like MIT, you put this in practice, I'm encouraging you to put it in practice, or a group from Georgia Tech. Because we're not normally on the leading edge, to be truthful. We're not normally on the leading edge. Now I'm opening it strictly for questions and answers and comments. Yes, sir.
So
I like your hairdo, by the way.
thank you. In your toll example, which you only touched upon briefly.
Yeah, that was not my intention.
No,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
But you specifically mentioned freight.
Price?
Freight.
Freight, yes I did.
I mean, there is a trend that, I mean, traditionally freight and passengers were pretty much treated separately.
Mhm.
That is all going to disappear as well, I
Mhm.
believe.
Good,
How does
good.
freight fit in your vision?
Well, that's a good question. I haven't tried to think about it, but clearly there's an origin and there's a destination, and you could make.
And you have space in your trunk usually.
Sure. Now that's great, and of course Uber's moved to that to some extent, right? Haven't they? People have moved to that.
We have
So-
several startups in Atlanta that are
Yeah.
doing this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good comment.
But I don't think they have, at least the ones that I've talked to, really think as big as your large-scale vision for public transport.
Yes.
How
I think
it
you're fair.
relates to parking,
Sure.
I mean, congestion. I mean, one of the biggest problem, I mean, if you hear the statistics on how much UPS pays, for example, in parking tickets per year,
Yep.
you would be astounded,
I see.
right?
Okay.
And, I mean, so it has to be an important, and that of course leads to congestion, right? They say,
Yes.
look, we double park, which is not good for congestion.
Absolutely.
So it seems to me that there has to be somehow in a expanded vision,
Yes.
a place for freight.
Yes, and I'm going to put that in the presentation the next time I give it. Because you're absolutely right. Once you're starting to control all the vehicles and charge automatically and so on, you might as well have that freight capability. Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
A lot of the presentation seemed to mention how you wanted convenience in bill paying and payment options.
Yes.
I guess go cashless, then go on your phone, and go to Apple Pay, and then go to Pay by Mind. But like right now, my phone, I can pay using Venmo, I can pay using my SunTrust account, I can pay using Uber.
Yep.
So there's 10 different people that have their pinky in my cookie jar, and that makes me feel very uncomfortable.
Yep.
How do you think the public will receive being able to walk through a, say, MARTA Fairgate without even doing anything except walking directly through it?
Okay. I understand your question. Now, that was the reason that at the very beginning I talked about subscriptions. So when you use Uber, I'm going to give them as an example again, at least my experience is you sign up for Uber and tell them how you want the fare to be charged. And it might be, I use either American Express or Visa, okay, or MasterCard, I think. And so if I use Uber, once a month, I get a bill that includes the Uber charges. So that the individual user can decide who's going to process the bill. Now, maybe you brought up a point that's valid. Maybe the Master app ought to give you a trip-by-trip choice. Maybe. I'm not so sure that adds too much, but it certainly adds. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So you're saying that the user should have the option of whether
The
they want to
user
tap it
has
on
the option, and they subscribe. That's why I had subscriptions right at the beginning. You have to subscribe to use the system. And that's one of the things you subscribe to, is how to handle the bill. Yes, sir.
So I have a follow-up related to the cost.
Okay.
So you mentioned the billing and incentives and all of those financial factors being integrated into this. If I'm a user of this, how much do you think that the financial factors as opposed to convenience and trip time and all of that will figure into the choice I make? For example, should I drive my own car? Should I rent a car? Should I ride share? Should I take
Sure.
transit?
Sure. I think it's a very vital component.
Do you think it's the dominant factor? Or
No.
is-
No, I don't. And again, I'm so glad Uber's out there, okay? Because I can point to them and say, they make a charge that's hidden, fairly significant charge, right? That they get some of the fun. Now, I think in this case, suppose I was doing almost daily ride share, just take that as an example. I think the charge against your cost for ride share, because remember, what your charge, if you're a passenger, goes probably to the driver, someone. That charge would be very small, because it's very efficient with all the data already in there to set you up for that ride share trip, which might be you either joined the vehicle when it took off, or you joined the vehicle at a stop someplace toward your neighborhood. All of a sudden it pays to walk too. Okay, you gotta take into account how much is the person willing to walk to and from their pickup and to and from their home. Or maybe not walk at all, or maybe their car only goes to the pickup point and from the pickup point. You're not really familiar with churches being parking spots, are you? Boy, there's a lot of parking spots around Atlanta that are in churches. If the churches could get a little revenue, and now you've known, people have signed up, you followed them to the parking spot, it's been recorded that they parked in the United Methodist Church in Sandy Springs. United Methodist Church is going to get a little fee. But economics is important. Economics is important. There's no doubt.
But if you really take this, visionary approach, then there are great opportunities there again to tie in freight. Because
Yes, I agree.
if your car is at the church, you could have your grocery store actually make delivery to your car, and you don't even have to go to the grocery store.
I like your thinking.
Right? And there are a lot of companies that are trying to think along those lines.
Yes, absolutely. And what you then need, and what you need on car rental or freight into the car, is you need a way for the vendors to open your trunk.
Which exists.
Which exists, and of
That
course that
technology.
technology can be provided through your cell phone. So you've got to be on the committee that puts this thing into practice, because that's one of the things that should be a feature. Yes, sir. I'm going to start at the back and you go here.
Do you think one of the features of the master app should be searching for answers even when you're not asking the questions? Like when I'm using Google Maps, say I want to go home at 5 o'clock, I go in and type that I want to, depart now. It tells me that it takes you so long to get home.
Yeah.
That's not, I don't want to go then because it takes too long. I have to ask the question again at 5:30 or see a projected travel time at 5:30 to make my decision.
Sure.
But what if I have an app that is constantly searching what's the best time for me to get home, and it pings an answer to me that says, depart now, you'll get to home in 15 minutes.
Yeah. You have a very good feature of the master app, right? It knows where you work.
Yeah.
It knows where you're going to go to. It could have an election that says, when I want a trip from home to, or from work to home, I want you to keep scanning for the best time for me to leave. Yep. And of course, people in New York City, you could say already do that, because the only choice they've got is a train. And they have to meet the train schedule.
The end goal being the app telling everybody when to leave,
Yes.
thereby making the roads congestion free, right? If
Yes.
everybody are told that you have to depart at a certain time,
Absolutely.
you can actually control how many vehicles are there on the
I have a follow-up question on that.
Okay, so we'll go to this gentleman. Yes.
So yes, if your app can decide for you or suggest when you go, you have some control over congestion.
Yes.
Ultimately, you would also like the driverless car that drives you to take the route that is best in terms of congestion, which may not be
Sure.
the shortest one.
Sure.
Do you think that we get to a point where people will accept that? Route guidance has been a problem partially because somehow people don't trust it and therefore don't do exactly what they're told.
Yeah.
Do you think there will be a point in time that we're so used to our smart app that if our app puts us in a car that is not putting us on the shortest road home, that we trust it and we'll
Oh,
still
yeah.
be happy?
Oh, yeah. Well, I trust mine, don't you? If I'm gonna drive home, I open Waze, that's my favorite,
Mhm.
which is a Google-owned thing. And by golly, I follow. I mean, it may not seem right, but I follow.
Okay.
I used to.
You do, okay. I wanted to ask this gentleman, he had his hand up.
Have you thought about how the final app will look after you incorporate all of these features? Because an important part of apps, of course your final product is an app, is the user experience.
Yes.
And most of the apps today, they try to simplify the user experience.
Absolutely, and that's what you want to do.
There are no manuals for using
Yep.
an app. You just want to open it and use it.
Yep.
And Google, Uber, they actually have a lot more groundwork in place to implement all of these things, but they do not, because they don't want to complicate their app.
They don't want to what?
They don't want to complicate their apps,
Yeah,
make it harder to use.
yeah.
So, has any work been done on the design of the app, or how
No,
it
there's
would look
been,
like?
for my part, there's been no work on it. But your point is very well taken. And one of the features you want is the same as I have on Waze, and you probably do too. When I open it, it asks me two questions. You want to go home